Hello, and my name is David Ingram, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the evolution of film noir. First of all, let's introduce you to the actual term, film noir. It's a French term, and it literally means a style or genre of cinematography in film marked by a mood of pessimism, fatalism, and menace. The term was originally applied by a group of French critics to American thriller or detective films made in the period 1944 to 1954, and to the works of directors such as Orson Welles, Fritz Lang, and Billy Wilder. But I will stress now that there are film noirs or noir-esque films that were made before 1944 and also after 1954. The term was first used by a French critic called Nino Frank. Nino Frank applied this term to 4 films he believed were quite similar in their themes, the way they were created in the aesthetics, so lighting, costume, and characterization. And these 4 films were The Maltese Falcon, considered one of the original and very first noirs in 1941, Farewell My Lovely, Murder My Sweet, 1944, Laura, 1944, and finally, one of my personal favourites, Double Indemnity, 1944. All these films collectively share similar themes and connections, which I shall move on to in just a moment, but I will first mention German Expressionism was the main founder of noir. Fritz Lang, the man behind The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and also M, was one of them German directors like Billy Wilder, who moved over from Germany just before the breakout of war, just to escape the Nazis, went over to Hollywood to create these films that they wanted to make. And people like Fritz Lang created the film M, which was essentially about a serial killer who preyed on children, was a paedophile, and killed them eventually. And it's very classic detective fiction, but it's the way that it was lit, and you can see in this picture here the way it was lit, and that's one of the main conventions of film noir. Film noir is nothing without its lighting. It literally translates film noir as black film. So if you don't have enough darkness in your film and it's black and white, it's probably not going to be in noir, essentially. That is one of the main noir tropes, and as you can see in this picture here from the 1944 classic Double Indemnity, Walter Neff is covered up by those lines that you can see there. So those are called Venetian blinds, and you just have sunlight or moonlight shining through them, and it creates a real mysterious effect. And this also is not just blinds, you can have spotlights, such as the spotlight used in Sunset Boulevard in 1950. And also you have these shots, these Dutch tilts, which were used to distort audiences, so it's not just someone leaving the tripod awkwardly angled. In The Third Man, 1949, and you can see here in the picture to the left, you've got a shadow of our character here, as well as just the general darkness of the staircase looking down, and also you have a silhouette of Harry Lime in action running, Harry Lime played by Orson Welles, down a very dark, gritty street. And streets like this can be found in most noirs. But moving on to another point, the femme fatale. Now, she is a woman who uses her sexuality for her own means, but also her employers, depending on what sort of noir you're looking at, whether it's the classic or the new. Here are just a few examples of some femme fatales. First of all, we have Phyllis Dietrichson, who is played by Barbara Stanwyck in Double Indemnity. She's showing her legs a lot there, and that is what she is famed for. In her first scene, she is only covered by a bath towel, and you can see her upper chest and her face, shortly followed by a tracking shot of her legs walking down the stairs. And she was because of the nature of the era, most men, like they are today, but also especially back then, were looking at these famous women voyeuristically for their own pleasure. Which is the same could be said for many other femme fatales, both classic and new. So we have here Anne Schmidt, played by Alida Valli, in The Third Man. And then we have Lynn Bracken in the neo-noir text LA Confidential 1997, who is a prostitute cut to look like Veronica Lake, another classic famous name from the classic Hollywood period. And then here's a personal idea for me from American Beauty 1999, where you have Kevin Spacey's Lester Burnham staring at Mina Suvari playing Angela Hayes, and she's looking very much similar blocking and positioning as Phyllis Dietrichson in Double Indemnity. On top of that, we have the costume, so we have these trench coats, so they could be black, the creamy sort of white colour when they're on black and white film, and those hats, like this example here. So we have Orson Welles playing Harry Lime in The Third Man. He is wearing the trench coat with a turned up collar to make him look extra evil. And then we have the hat, and here are a couple of other images of men from many noir films wearing hats, such as The Third Man, Maltese Falcon, and Double Indemnity. And that was essentially due to the setting of the 1940s, 50s, why they were wearing these sort of hats. But also you get them in the neo-noirs and the throwback to noirs, such as LA Confidential, where they're set in the 50s, and they imitate them with all the suits and the dresses and the hats and coats. And most of these classic noirs would be set in Los Angeles, such as Double Indemnity, LA Confidential, and also Blade Runner as well. So lots of these different types of noir would be set in Los Angeles because it was considered the hub of crime and where most things could happen. But it's not the only place, because as I said, you have The Third Man, which is set in Vienna in the 1940s, but then we go back to other types of noir. We have Sunset Boulevard, which is a Hollywood-centric story, and that's, to be honest, on the classic noir, you can wrap that up on that, other than the fact that German expressionists inspired the classic American copycats, essentially. LA Confidential is a brilliant example of a throwback to the classic noir period, but then you have texts such as American Beauty, which are considered dramas, just standard, like, gripping pieces of film, but they do have the noir tropes, so like the voiceover, which is another classic noir convention used in Double Indemnity by Walter Neff, who confesses everything before the movie's even started. And this similar confession is used in Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard, where the film is narrated by a dead man, and this same technique of a dead man beyond the grave narrating the events of the past is the same thing in American Beauty. And as you can see here in the picture here, between Mina Suvari and Kevin Spacey's characters, we have a very darkly lit room with only rain and some moonlight shining in onto the room. So that's very much like the old noir lighting style that they used. And there's no Venetian blinds in American Beauty, but this shot here, which is classically read as Lester being put into jail behind bars of these figures that are on his computer, whereas you can actually see that they're a bit like a form of Venetian blind, just not horizontal and not a Venetian blind, but they are very, very clearly close to the noir-esque style. And then, of course, you just have general themes of the events happen at night time, such as Lester Burnham's, spoiler alert, death, and the way that the light shines onto him as the blood ripples down his face. And speaking of the Venetian blinds, if you look at this picture from Blade Runner of Harrison Ford's Rick Deckard, there is clearly a classic noir influence here, even though it's a futuristic Los Angeles. This shot is very similar to Walter Neff in Double Indemnity, as you can see here, very, very similar with the Venetian blinds. And also just the general themes. You have Rachel the replicant, who is another femme fatale. Moving on from the classic noir era into the neo or new noir era, there was plenty of changes to the classic conventions that I've just described to you, particularly in the use of violence and also sexual imagery. Particularly a great example of this will be Get Carter from 1971, starring Michael Caine, a British neo-noir, and it's very famous for its gruesome, gritty, sexual violence. all the imagery presented there, and particularly, most notably, the remake in 1978 of the 1946 film The Big Sleep, added a lot more nudity and gruesome, violent imagery compared to the original one, as you may see here in the images. Mona Lisa in 1986 is another example of a British neo-noir in which the sexual and violent imagery was clearly portrayed and exploited because there was less censorship after the 1970s, the age of the Rocky Horror Picture Show and the Halloween franchise. We now get to see a new style of violence and sexual imagery in the noir style or genre. And this is also described into the neo-noir text Taxi Driver from 1976, a vigilante story about a taxi driver, obviously, played by Robert De Niro. And it just shows that you didn't have to have detectives established, you could have people taking the law into their own hands. And then on top of that, you have females who are just overly sexualized more than they already were back in the classic era, which the show of a leg was enough to get the men at home going. Moving on to television to finish off my podcast. Nowadays, the film industry has made television companies have the need to keep up with their filmic counterparts and make more cinematic viewing, but for those of you at home on your sofas. The BBC's Happy Valley, which had a series run in 2012 and one more recently in 2016. And this is in broad daylight, very un-noir-like, but it's a crime thriller TV series spread across 6 episodes each series, and it just has this strong independent female character which wouldn't have been possible back in the classic noir era, such as people like Barbara Stanwyck as Phyllis Dietrichson, or even Alida Valli in The Third Man. And although they were quite crafty female characters, this shows that in the new age of television and new age of neo-noir film, that females can be the ones in charge, and that they don't have to be submitted to men's orders, and they can do whatever they want. So Catherine Carewood is a sergeant, played by Sarah Lancashire. She is a strong independent woman as a policewoman in a role of authority who does what she needs to do to serve justice. And although, yes, it's in colour, it's not necessarily a noir, but it's a crime thriller, which is exactly what a noir was back in the day, and why Nina Frank applied that term to that specific genre. And it also shows a different view of the female personality, such as Catherine, and she is not a femme fatale, unlike many of the female characters in noir or crime thriller genre in the early days, but now she's more of a post-feminist icon because she is a strong, independent woman who is very clear on what she wants. She is a police sergeant and she doesn't care what she does to get to the top, and that may mean using some strong language and a good old-fashioned beatdown if she thinks something is wrong. Other examples of television, more older, include the Mickey Spillane's Mike Hammer TV series, which you can also link to the 1955 noir classic Kiss Me Deadly. And of course we have Stacy Keach here in the role of Mike Hammer in 1984 to 85 series, but we also had Ralph Meeks in the role in the filmic version of Mike Hammer based on the classic pulp fiction novels that people would read in the 50s. And of course Kiss Me Deadly was also another example of neo-noir, but in the noir era, because it was black and white, but it was on the boundaries of sci-fi, very much like LA Confidential, because although it was a 50s based film, you could say it was very modern in the way it was presented to us in a retrospective way. And other TV shows including WPC 56, Midsummer Murders, Endeavour, Inspector Morse, A Touch of Frost, the list goes on, of TV shows which are crime thrillers or detective shows, but they bring an essence of noir to them in a completely different light. There's not so much harsh shadowing, and also these detective shows, specifically actually Endeavour and WPC 56, show that you can have a crime occur in broad daylight as well as Midsummer Murders, and you don't have to hide in the shadows. that's about it for my illustrated podcast on noir. So I hope you've enjoyed it and learnt something, and have a good day. Goodbye.